Sir Norman Bettison is with me. Very good evening, and thank you for coming in. You have always used this phrase, I was peripheral to the disaster.
Myth number one, and I suspect there'll be lots more this evening. Myth number one is, to the best of my knowledge, I used the word once, and I used it very specifically.
Where did you use it?
I used it when I was talking to the Merseyside Police Authority, following their appointment of me as the Chief Constable.
I think you used it in a letter to Newsnight in 1999 when you were requested for an interview.
Right.
Would you accept that you were not peripheral, whether you were peripheral to the disaster, you were not peripheral to the aftermath?
I say in the book that you know, the fact that I've
devoted 350 pages about it,
and I've devoted two chapters to the tasks that I undertook. That's not an insignificant, inconsequential role. Right. But I've never, you know, that my name is attached to lots of things, and lots of things are myths.
Right. OK, well, no, but you did say you were peripheral to the disaster.
Peripheral to the disaster.
In exact terms, you were, because no one would say you played a big role on the day in terms of the...
But it was at a time that I was being dubbed the Hillsborough Chief.
But you have also said you were a messenger. You weren't really there shaping or advocating for South Yorkshire Police. You were a messenger. You were listening to the tailor. You were listening to Taylor and then reporting back to the Chief Constable on what was going on. Do you still hold that?
Chief Inspector. I was a relatively junior rank, a middle rank.
I mean, you know, we've got this memo. This is all out of the sort of inquest evidence. You were writing a thing here about a Yorkshire television documentary, and you were talking about possibly trading some of the footage in terms of better coverage. You were trying to shape the case. Maybe we could show the police trying to determine whether barrier 124A failed, possibly before Gate C was open. This is all stuff. This is advocacy. This is PR. This is not just kind of reporting, is it?
You probably haven't got the time on the programme to do justice to the nuances of that. But I can assure you that the coroner's inquest that recently concluded did, because I was asked for my version under oath of what was taking place when I wrote that memo. And we spent a lot of time with cross-examination by barristers talking about that. That is online for anybody that's so motivated to find it.
It's a distinction in terms. You think that's being a messenger. Most of us, I think, would say that's you shaping the case and being a sort of, basically, a spin doctor,
well,
put the modern phrase on it.
It may not be the first time I say this tonight. What I'm hoping is that people will read the book, because I cover the ground in the book.
Right. Well, we've read it so they don't have to, or maybe they'd like to read it as well. Would you agree that before the Taylor inquiry, before the first inquest into what had gone wrong, you were willing to blame the fans to some significant degree?
What I would say is that police officer evidence that was gathered at the time did attach some blame to fan behaviour in the build-up to the crush that happened outside the Levins Lane end. What became crystal clear during Taylor, and I was there for every day of it, I listened to 174 witnesses, what became crystal clear is that that had nothing to do with the disaster and the 96 deaths that occurred.
So, in a sense, your opinion changed. There was a point...
I say in the book.
So, Wayne Report, this is the first statement, if you like, of the police that went to the Taylor inquest. Basically, that, you know, we know that you drafted this. It's apparent, even at this early stage, there's evidence a large number of fans had attended at the ground without tickets. All of that, you now realise, was wrong, and that was because basically your colleagues had got in a
No, there are some facts in there, and the facts might still stand, but what doesn't stand is that that was in any way to blame for the disaster.
Why do you persist, whenever you talk about it, in mentioning the fact that the fans turned up late, some of them were drunk? You've actually done it again in the book, haven't you? You just can't resist. You cannot resist saying it's nothing to do with the fans, who, by the way, did some of them turn up late and some of them were drunk. You just can't stop yourself doing it.
I do it in 2 paragraphs in a 355-page book.
Do you know how offensive that is to the families? That it's as though you can't let go of that particular fact.
But these are facts that I believe shouldn't be concealed.
Were they relevant?
They weren't relevant to the disaster.
Mention it? Why mention it
Because my precursor sentence, if you were fair to me, my precursor sentence in the book is, I only mention it here to show the source of the hurt that has been felt for such a long time that the police always blamed the fans for the disaster. And I said where that source of information came from. That's why I mention it in the book.
Well, in the book, you say one of the causes of all these problems is a couple of coppers talking in a bar afterwards and saying the fans were misbehaving. And that, it stretches credulity to think that everything that happened could have come from a couple of guys talking in a bar. You went to MPs, did you not? Showed them a video with football violence depicted in the video.
The press picked all of their material up.
What, from just two guys?
They picked all of their material up from a news agency based in Sheffield that picked it up from
two guys?
I don't know if it was two, I don't know if it was
more than two. So who did you, when you went to MPs and you showed them a video, a briefing video that had pictures of football violence in it,
yes.
Where did you pick up the idea that violence was that? I mean, you didn't pick it up from two guys in the bar.
No, it's not a depiction of any sort of hooliganism at Hillsborough. I say very clearly, and I've always said very clearly, there was no hooliganism in play at Hillsborough on the fateful afternoon. There was none.
Why did you show hooliganism in a video to MPs?
The context for the video is, how did we ever, in the 1980s, end up with caging football fans in? And that's
very odd that you put it there, because you know a couple of Tory MPs were going to denounce the Taylor inquest. You were writing to your boss saying, well, they're ready to denounce, they can't wait because it's all been delayed.
It doesn't quite say that.
But it's pretty well that. Sorry, it's pretty well that.
No.
And clearly your goal is to try and persuade these guys there's a completely different narrative, which is the fact.
Quite the reverse. The video, which I'd provided to the IPCC, actually speaks for itself.
If I was writing a book and people had accused me of confusing this and saying all the things that you've said, I probably wouldn't re-mention all the accusations of the fans, even in to absolve them, because you know it's upset the
I'm hoping you've read the book that I've written, because actually what I do say is, in the next two paragraphs, I will mention simply as a source of the hurt that the bereaved families have felt.
Let's go to some other things in the book very quickly. We don't have all night. You endorsed the findings of the independent panel.
Yes, I did.
2009 to 2012, they looked at all the documents. You then said you didn't know whether they were really independent.
Yes.
You then went into a whole section on confirmation bias, looking for evidence to suit what you previously thought.
What I said is that the people that were looking at the new evidence weren't agnostic about what had happened in the aftermath of the disaster. And I've described elsewhere, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. If you find the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle without the picture on the box front, or with a picture in your mind about what you're seeking to make, you can force the pieces together and they don't actually fit.
It's a bit rich, isn't it, for you to write a book after this tragedy, to write a book about confirmation bias, looking for evidence to suit your view. You guys were doing blood tests on dead bodies to see if they'd been drinking alcohol. Talk about looking for evidence to try and make a case to fit what is convenient. This was an independent panel. Do you accept that they were independent or not?
Yes, yeah. What I accept is that they were the best people to do that research and write that paper. Nobody else could have done it, and nobody else could have reached the conclusions that led to a new inquest.
The conclusion of the book is the chapter on the shadow of Salem, you called it. You effectively imply that you're the victim of a witch hunt. And you sort of bemoan the fact that we have too much of a blame culture and we scapegoat and try and point fingers rather than learn lessons.
No, what I actually point to is that there's a preponderance these days to leap to judgment. There's no, the idea of the presumption of innocence is dead.
But don't you think, I mean, you know, everybody says the best way after an accident is to be like the airlines are, to be like the aircraft industry. Don't have a big blame culture, because you won't get honesty out of people. So you really try to learn the lessons. The deal is, if we're going to be forgiving of mistakes, is that the people who make the mistakes are honest about what has happened.
Absolutely.
But you're not going to look back at what happened and say, South Yorkshire Police open-mindedly appraised all the evidence of what happened that afternoon, went into Taylor with all that open-minded stuff, and then have not obstructed at all.
There's an issue that I call the cover-up conundrum. And the conundrum is this. 16 weeks after the disaster, Lord Justice Taylor had heard all this evidence from various sources and settled the matter. He settled the matter within 16 weeks. The primary blame for the deaths in that April afternoon was the police. That was what the conclusion was 16 weeks after the disaster. That's been reaffirmed in the recent coroner's inquest.
With a lot more detail.
What's been covered up in between times?
I noticed just finally on the cover, it's Norman Bettison. You've dropped
Yes.
the knighthood on the cover. Now, what's going on there?
Well, I was told by the publisher that you never put your
You're not worried about
entitlements.
losing the knighthood.
Yes,
It's
no.
not. You don't have to reprint.
Well, I talk about that in the book as well. It's worth a read.
Sir Norman Bettison, thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed.